Hello, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the Conversations on International Development series my colleague from the law school at Warwick, Dr. Serena Natile. She joined us from Brunel University only recently, so I'm very grateful for her to make time to do this conversation. Serena's research interests lie in the areas of gender studies, law and development, global political economy, finance, and digital technologies. In her research, Serena brings together socio-legal inquiry, critical political economy analysis, and feminist and decolonial methods to examine issues relating to social reproduction, maldistribution, and more generally, the relationship between law and social injustice. Her recent book, The Exclusionary Politics of Digital Financial Inclusion, Mobile Money, Gendered Walls. Serena, many congratulations for that. Published in 2020, provides a socio-legal critique of the narratives, institutions, and governance of digital financial inclusion as a development strategy for gender equality. It was recently listed in the DECON Top 10 Alternative Readings to the mainstream literature on global political economy, which forms part of the decolonization movement and diversification of knowledge. And as you know, in PACE, we are doing a lot of work on this as well. Serena, very warm welcome to you. And thank you again for taking the time to converse with me. So what I wanted to start off with was, why do you think microfinance has become such a panacea for development institutions when addressing issues of gender equality? And how is it located globally and in terms of this concern with gender equity?
Thank you so much, Shirin. First of all, thank you so much for the very generous introduction. I'm very delighted to be here. Also because you inspired a lot of my work on gender and development, because of course I drew upon your work to link gender and development frameworks and critiques of development to the legal kind of infrastructure and the international legal framework. So this has been extremely important for me. And I think it's important also to be at intersections and work between politics, international development, and law, and this constant exchange and interaction that we have is extremely important for our research and for students. Just to answer your question, first of all, I'm sure students are familiar with this, but microfinance, we can define microfinance as a development project. As a development project, microfinance means to lend small amounts of money to a group of, particularly of women, in order to allow them with a small amount of money to start an income generating activity. So let's say a small business, for instance. The reason why microfinance has been developed in the framework, of course, of international development is for different reasons. So the first reason was because women have been excluded from the economy and from finance more specifically. It's important to think, when we ask the aspect of exclusion of women from the economy, also to think about the broader global framework of colonialism and the reasons why women have been excluded. Because this needs to be contextualized and is very important. When the colonialism was introduced and different colonial rules and institutions were introduced, these were framed around specific gendered institutions. One of these gender institutions was, for instance, the commodification of land, of the introduction of property rights. And property rights were created in the name of man. If we think about English colonialism, for instance, this was very much in line with the Victorian values of the time, having the idea of man as the household head or the breadwinner. And this was the same, so besides property right, it was the same with the introduction of the wage economy. With the introduction of the wage economy, the man, this was in a way discriminatory for everyone, for all the colonized, so men, women, but of course the gender dynamics were extremely important. So in introducing the wage economy, women were relegated to the status of secondary workers. So men were kind of portrayed as primary workers and breadwinners, and women as secondary workers. So they were excluded from earning money, and in this way they couldn't have access to finance. And in order to have access to finance, it's important to have or property or to have an income, because of course you need to provide some kind of securities to the financial institutions in order to have access to a loan, for instance. So you need to have money if you want to open a bank account or access to financial institutions. So the idea of giving access to finance to women was in order to allow them in a way to have access to the economy and to have access to financial institutions more broadly. So microfinance was portrayed as an important development project in order to include women in the economy and the financial system, and also was considered as a kind of a long-term sustainable project in the eyes of development institutions, because by lending money to women, it would allow them to start a small business, for instance. What is important to think is also that microfinance in the form of microcredit specifically, so the idea of lending small amounts of money to groups of women, was introduced by Mohammed Yunus in Bangladesh to start with. He studied for his PhD in the US, and when he went back to Bangladesh, he started working on kind of grassroots development and wanted to develop a project. And the first form of microfinance was actually him lending money directly from his pocket to women to start these projects. And something really relevant in terms of your question and the kind of local and global implications is that while the idea of microfinance was developed by Yunus in Bangladesh, then was easily and very soon advocated as an international development project and was exported to many other countries. Was also part of the World Bank and IMF, International Monetary Fund, structural adjustment programs. Yes, for this reason, and so was internationalized in a way. So we can consider microfinance a very important development project for gender equality because of the inclusion of women in the eyes of international organizations, because of the kind of localized aspect of microfinance. So one of the key critiques of development at the beginnings in the 50s and in the 60s were that all decisions were made particularly in Washington, where the IMF, the World Bank were. So a form of kind of localized development was extremely important. But a key reason why also microfinance became so important internationally is because it was very much in line with the neoliberal policies of development. When microfinance was introduced as a development project at the international level, it took the place of more subsidized forms of support from the state. And this was considered very in line with the ideas of neoliberal development in terms of privatizations, liberalizations, the involvement of the private sector, and particularly the shift of responsibilities to the people and the very little role played by the state. So with microcredit, you shift responsibilities to the group of borrowers, in the case, the group of, more specifically, the group of women. And by shifting responsibility, they will need to repay the money. So there is not very much responsibility for and risk in particular for the microfinance institution itself. So all this logic was considered very in line with the neoliberal framework of development, with all the kind of negative implications that we know also for gender equality more specifically. But these were the kind of logics that were used at the international level in order to promote microcredit and microfinance as gender equality mechanisms.
So, Serena, thank you so much. You've sort of laid it out so clearly and also historicized it, sort of, which is really important. And of course, the students will be looking at Muhammad Yunus's work because we are doing a whole session on it. But I wanted to just sort of bring your chronology to your own book first. What do you think this kind of initiative, the microcredit, microfinance initiative, do you think it's qualitatively changing with the digitization of it? So the book is on digital financial finance. So do you think it has made an enormous difference, or is it just a continuation of what you have already just told us?
Yes, in a way, it's a continuation. So while microfinance was promoted very much as a development project for these reasons. So let's say we had this chronological approach, if we want to adopt this, that goes from the introduction of the development project, let's say in the 1950s, after many colonies became independent, and so the end of colonialism, and we have the introduction of the International Development Project, which in many ways was also to kind of manage the economic order, also in the interest of Western states, as I'm sure students also addressed many of the critiques of development. And one of the first steps was, of course, towards economic development. So there was this key focus on economic growth. And here is when we have the introduction of of course, the neoliberal framework and the structural adjustment programs that I mentioned before. Then what is very important, I think, in relation to microfinance is that while microfinance was, as I mentioned before, internationalized from Yunus' experience in the structural adjustment programs, it also was kind of repackaged when the Millennium Development Goals were adopted. So microfinance was repackaged not just as contributing to economic growth, so by allowing women to start a small business, for instance, but was reconsidered as contributing to the Millennium Development Goals, in particular poverty reduction and gender equality specifically. And there was even a year for the UN year for microcredit in 2006 as well. So in the middle, let's say, of the Millennium Development Goals when they were adopted. So there was all an institutional support for this project. And I think this is extremely important also to go back to what I was mentioning in terms of contextualizing the introduction of microfinance. So microfinance in the eyes of development institutions aimed to include women in a system that was created on their exclusion. So women were excluded from development, from any kind of economic activity, from the wage economy to migration for working reasons, to property, to land during colonialism. And this was extremely criticized when the development project started. And the UN institutions started working on this. And of course, I'm sure students are familiar with Esther Bosrup's work on the status of women in economic development that claimed how colonialism excluded women from economic, educational, technological opportunities. So the process of development can be in a way considered as kind of including conditionally women in the economy and in the development project. And there is this kind of continuity if we go from microcredit to microfinance to more recent forms of financial inclusion. Something else which is extremely important is that while microfinance can be considered in a development perspective as providing new opportunities to women, in a way a lot of research has demonstrated how it is also extremely exploitative, because microfinance also extracts a lot of value from the work of women. So the same idea of relying on groups of women means that you shift risk towards them and you take advantage, extract some value from the kind of self-help groups and grassroots organizations in a way. But also because of the strict repayments you are forced to have with the organized microcredit, this also forces women sometimes to not to be able to have resources to feed the family and the children, but having to repay the loans as a kind of a priority in their everyday economic activities. And this has been extremely problematic from a gender perspective, because from an inclusion perspective, you can claim, yes, microcredit has contributed to include more women in the economic system, but at the same time, it's also created a lot more inequality, because microcredit, the lending of very small amount of money, also means that you have a very limited amounts of possibilities in terms of the kind of business that you can start. And usually these small businesses are around hairdressing or selling flowers or food-related activities, or selling like small manufacturers or used clothes and these kind of very small businesses. And of course, there is no demand, because when you allow many groups of women to start this kind of activities, also means that the market is full of these activities and there is no demand for these activities anymore. So I think this critique is extremely important, because it also shows this kind of continuity of including women in the economic system has never been just about giving women also the resources to actually create a different economic dynamics, but there's always been about including them, giving them the opportunity to be included without giving actually them the resources. And with digital finance is very similar, because with digital finance in particular, the project I look at in the book is mobile money, which is mobile phone enabled money transfer systems that have very much contributed to increase the number of women having access to finance, because of course access to mobile phones is much easier, because you can borrow a mobile phone, or is very cheap to buy because also of the manufacturing in Asia that is then imported in Africa. So it's very easy to have access to a mobile phone. So accessing financial institutions from through a mobile phone has been very easy. So although this has contributed to create more access, give more access, more opportunities to access finance, the logic has been very much the same from microcredit through microfinance to digital finance.
Great. Well, I mean, again, sort of, I think these are issues which you take up in your book, and I want to sort of think about, I just want you to tell us a little bit more about the M-Pesa, the Kenyan Financial Inclusion Project which is your main case study. And also to say a little bit more, you've already mentioned that how the logic of opportunity trumps the politics of redistribution. And I was sort of, somebody might ask you, what is wrong with the focus on inclusion? And whether you'd want to say a little bit more on that. So first, if you can tell us a little bit about the M-Pesa, the financial project, because I'm sure a lot of students would be interested in that specificity. That would be great.
Yes, thank you, Shirin. So the key project I was looking at is M-Pesa in Kenya. And the reason why I looked at this project is because it's one of the most famous mobile money projects to date. And the reason why it's so famous is because it's now used, this mobile money system is used by 80% of the Kenyan population. And the growth was very quick and very rapid throughout since the adoption of the system, the launch of the system in 2007. So M-Pesa is a private-public development project. So it means that was funded through DFID, the UK Department for International Development, and Vodafone. So they're kind of, one of those public-private partnerships to fund development projects. And the aim of the project was to provide people who might have access to mobile phones but don't have access to finance with the opportunity to access financial services. This is mainly a money transfer system. So what people do through M-Pesa is they can use a very simple black and white mobile phones, top up the mobile phone and send money to someone else or pay for products or services. What is interesting about M-Pesa is a similarity with microfinance, which is, so the idea of microfinance was developed by Yunus, however, was built on a grassroots practice that was very much women's self-help and rotating credit and savings associations. So women kind of getting together And this was, again, a consequence of the fact that they were mainly excluded from colonialism, from the economy and finance. So the only way for them to support each other was to get together and put some money together and try to support each other. So in rotating credit and savings associations, women put money in a pot, and then each of them can use the money each week for, household related things, or sometimes for business related activities. But this is a practice that was developed informally from the colonial time. And microcredit developed also so quickly because it was easy for development institutions to draw upon these already well-constituted groups of women in order to then allow microfinance to function. With M-Pesa, there was a strong similarity, not women-based, but in terms of informal practice, which is that when mobile phones were introduced in many African countries, not just in Kenya, people started exchanging prepaid airtime. So in the kind of old-fashioned black and white mobile phones, you had to top up your credit. So you had a scratch card, you had to scratch the card and enter the code and top up your phone. So it was very easy to exchange value in this way. So I had to pay you for a coffee. I could send you the code of a scratch card. So I would send you value, and you could top up your phone with a number. So I have kind of value through phone calls or messages, or you could sell the code to someone and value. So people started using this as a kind of an informal way of exchanging value. So what this public-private partnership through DFID and Vodafone did was very much to institutionalize and formalize this practice, linking it to financial networks. So through the Central Bank of Kenya, so that the fiscal money are actually kept in the bank, but people using the system don't have any access to the bank. They only have access to these small agents. And these small agents are just small shops that used to sell mobile phones or scratch card that have been converted into these mobile money agents. So people can go there to open an account, can go there to top up their M-Pesa account, can go there to withdraw money. So it's very easy because you just open an account on your phone. So you have this kind of electronic wallet, and then you can top up your e-wallet. So you have credit on that, and you can use it to send money. And then various financial products have been linked, so it's easy for M-Pesa accounts, for M-Pesa users to automatically have access to a savings account or have access to credit, automatic credit. And again, all the information of this is done through the M-Pesa account, so you will be given credit only if you have a good record in topping up your phone. And sometimes the repayments are taken directly from your way of topping up the phone. So you top up the phone and then you had already a debt through a credit system, and this is taken directly. So the kind of financial access, financial products have been built into this mobile money transfer system in order to allow people to have more access to finance.
Serena, can I jump in here and ask you one question, which is, we are talking about gender, but we have so far only talked about women. So this M-Pesa program, I mean, my experience from South Asia is that a lot of men seem to sort of control telephones for various reasons. Firstly, who can buy the phones, who has access, who is the hierarchy of needs, who goes first, and also about controlling women, right? So, and I was wondering whether that has, this mechanism, this digital mechanism, has shifted gender kind of relations on the ground as well as or is it that, like microfinance, women continue to be the people who are more more women are accessing than men this M-Pesa?
Yeah, so in everyone can access it. The point of M-Pesa is that it's much easier for women to access because you don't need to have a credit score or property in order to open an account. You just need your ID to open your account. So
sorry about this.
you don't need any kind of credit record or property, which is the reason why it's easy to see. So when you look at statistics, and then you look at the initial statistics, you have about 20% of the population having access to finance, and the majority is men, huge majority is men, like let's say 18%, 17%. And then you see like the change with the introduction of digital finance through mobile money, so through mobile phones, and you see all these women having access to the system. So the kind of statistics show that this increase just because there are less requirements. And I think, so a key point that I make, also going back to your previous question in my book, is that while the key question the development projects ask is how to include more women in the financial system, they never ask why women are more excluded, going back to the gender relations as well. And that's the reason why I mentioned the colonial legacy of particular legal institutions like property or land or the wage economy before. So women are more excluded from finance because they don't have a regular source of income. And this has been, I noticed this across all my fieldwork in many different situations. But instead of addressing the causes of financial exclusion, what development projects do through financial inclusion is to provide more opportunities. So the actual reasons why women are excluded are not addressed. And I consider this to be extremely problematic for two reasons. One is this logic of opportunity gives more opportunities to women, leaving them the responsibilities to take advantage of these opportunities and blaming them in case they are not able to take advantage of these opportunities. And this is extremely dangerous because from a feminist perspective, we can apply some social reproduction lens and saying women are disproportionately responsible for unpaid work. And by giving them the opportunity to have access to finance, you also contribute to increase their amount of unpaid work because they will need, of course, to manage, their family life together with small businesses trying to make more money. So by giving more opportunities without giving them the means to actually take advantage of those opportunities, you also increase their amount of unpaid work. And of course, this is problematic. And the other reason that by creating these opportunities and promoting this as success, so all the funding goes in creating more and more of these platforms instead of actually addressing some of the key structural issues related to employment, of course, related to social infrastructure, related to support in terms of social welfare. So this is very much, as we were saying before, in line with what happened with microfinance and microcredit and the kind of gendered critiques of those projects. And this logic of opportunity also does not redistribute resources. So by giving the opportunity, you shift all this responsibility for development without taking a strong political stand in terms of redistributing resources to give actually the means to then take advantage of financial inclusion.
Great. Given this kind of downward pressure, and I really appreciated also earlier you were saying about sort of, you're generating a supply side economics, which means that sort of the saturation, at least at the local level, is very quick, and therefore also people are getting into debt. And also, of course, as you just said, if you start using credit for everyday life, and women are responsible more than men generally for that, then there are also other issues which undermine that inclusion on terms which are not their own. So this sounds very disciplinary and disciplining to me. But in your book, thankfully, you also think through the politics of solidarity. And I really want you to tell us a little bit more about this in the context of microcredit. Is there any kind of pushback against the disciplinary aspects of microcredit from the women it affects? And if there is, then can you tell us a little bit more about that? That'll be great.
Yes, so I kind of relate this kind of idea of solidarity as against the idea of of autonomy, which is something that is generally very strictly linked to gender equality and the empowerment of women, so providing them autonomy. And also going back to your question before, with the digital finance, so by allowing women to have their own digital financial account, this would contribute to their autonomy according to international development institutions, right? Although we know that this framework of freedom and autonomy is very misleading because it does not consider many of the kind of gendered structural relations. So I also wanted to bring in this aspect of solidarity for two reasons. So one is that we can see very easily how solidarity has been very often instrumentalized by development institutions. And this has been done in microcredit, because as I was mentioning before, the same fact of relying on group lending. So the kind of standard form of microcredit when it was introduced was lending to groups of women. And the reason for lending to groups of women would be that they would be collectively responsible to repay the loans. And this collective responsibility would ensure repayment, so the sustainability of the microfinance institution, but also would create very complex dynamics because women would kind of, challenge, would kind of feel to be this kind of individual relations that are in a way complexified through the pressure of the repayments. So if there is any situation in their families, let's say like a very practical example, if someone has a sick child and needs more support that would normally get from, the self-help group, because of the pressure of having to repay the loans, creates very complex dynamics within the group as well. So the idea of kind of co-opting these forms of solidarity has been extremely problematic, and it's been also problematic because very often in development narratives this has been romanticized as a form of empowerment, while very often forms of solidarity kind of develop from a form of necessity that women will need to kind of cope with particular situations. What I found in terms of the microcredit system and the financial inclusion system more generally is that they do have many forms of resistance. So all these kind of groups are actually forms of grassroots feminism, and they would of course act to support each other economically, financially, but also in a kind of to create more political pressure. And this has been going on for a long time. And the way that, for instance, they have escaped all these disciplinary form of microcredit was to create their own rotating credited savings associations, learning from the experience in the microcredit institution and trying to do it without the constraints of a microcredit institution that would exploit their work. So I've seen a lot of these examples in my fieldwork of women actually creating their own constitution, their own rules, and doing this without big constraint within the kind of microfinance institution per se. And I saw very similar dynamics in the M-Pesa and mobile finance system, because in the same way it's very easy to kind of extract value from these forms of collaborations and solidarity, because different projects, actually specific digital financial products have been developed for grassroots groups. So targeting specifically grassroots groups. And every time you use these digital financial platforms, you pay a small fee, which is proportionate to the amount you transfer. And of course, this is a form of extracting value, because if you develop a financial product specifically for a group of women, also means that you know that you will make a profit from that. So this is something very common, but women are totally aware of this, and they kind of try to develop only kind of use the system just for, to the extent that it is absolutely necessary, and try to kind of develop their own dynamics. But of course, it's very difficult when you rely on resources that are to you in a particular way. And this goes back to the previous point that I was making. Even all these profits and income that this digital finance is generating, as it was very much the case for microcredit, is not redistributed to people, but constitutes a secure source of income for the providers instead. So this is, of course, extremely problematic, and that goes back to my argument about the lack of redistributive politics in the system.
Well, that's great. So, in conclusion, what is your feeling then, given the pushback, given new forms of solidarity which are not so instrumentalized? I mean, is there a sort of, going forward, is there a future life for microcredit as a development strategy?
So my own approach to this would be that it's absolutely necessary to think about very different politics to provide and develop these projects. So I think the kind of constant financialization and accumulation that all these projects have created has been extremely problematic. And when we think about the women using microfinance or digital finance, we also need to think about this kind of double discrimination, not just about the intersections of gender, race, ethnicity, religion, and other forms, but also the kind of political economy intersections of women that have been included in a system created, as I mentioned before, on their exclusion at the local level, but this also happens at the global level. So there is a double exclusion because they were included locally in a system that was created on their exclusion, and globally because, of course, of the colonial history and the exploitation of former colonial countries. So this is extremely important to consider, and is never considered in this project on microfinance and digital finance. And so it's very important to take seriously this kind of thinking about reparations and the colonial responsibilities in order to allow a different system. So I think all the problem with these financial systems, as well as even if they are developed through kind of aid agencies, is that there is this kind of reproduction of the same narratives over and over again, instead of giving back that amount of global wealth that should be owned by former colonial countries, is not that should be given to them. And I think there are some systems of finance and digital finance that can be used in order to contribute to this redistribution. But this needs to be based on a very different politics of, universal basic income, of reparations, of changing the logics underpinning this kind of system of accumulation that tends to, of course, create an advantage for the financial institutions. And of course, giving these resources to the grassroots women that know exactly how to use them, and they don't really need to be educated and trained and have the financial education that they already have, because they acquired that education through their everyday economic practices. So I think rethinking this kind of broader politics of finance, and using finance as a way to redistribute resources instead of as a way to accumulate resources.
Thank you, Serena. That was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed the conversation and learned a lot. And we are going to read your paper and discuss it again in class. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much.